Beyond, and hello everyone. My name is Jonathon Dornbush, and this is Podcast Beyond, episode 653. And I have the cadence of how I'm speaking really sticking out in my mind because Janet Garcia did a very good impersonation of me before we started recording. And we are joined, in fact, this week by Janet. And I'll get to the cast in a second, but before we move on, I do want to say, if you are wondering, because obviously it's one of the biggest PS4 games left to come this year, our Ghost of Tsushima review will go up later in July, on July 14th on IGN, and it's being done by Mitchell Saltzman. Mitchell is a fantastic writer, a fantastic reviewer. He really knows his stuff. So super excited to have him doing that review. And we'll definitely have him on the show to talk through his review thoughts once all of that goes up. But basically, can't say anything until that review embargo comes up. So look forward to that. Do also want to mention that if you're listening to this the week this goes up, Tom Marks's Marvel's Iron Man VR review will also be going live this week, so you can stay tuned for that because that game goes live on the PSN at the end of this week. And just to quickly touch on last week's episode with Brian and Khalif, I did want to apologize. There was a Last of Us 2 spoiler that slipped by. I didn't even realize it was said until after the fact, and I am so incredibly sorry to anyone who was spoiled by that. That's obviously never our intention on the show. We always try to give very clear spoiler warnings in advance, and unfortunately that slipped through, and I'm so sorry. I hope you can continue to check in on the game and continue playing it, because obviously we'll be talking about it in the future, including on this episode, but this episode's discussion will remain spoiler free. With that all mostly out of the way, I did want to jump into the show because I'm joined this week by Janet.
Hey, what's up?
Hello, Janet. We're also joined by Lucy O'Brien.
Good day. How are you?
I'm doing pretty well, Lucy. How are you?
I'm not bad.
Good. And we're also wonderfully joined this week by a very special guest. Steve Saylor has joined us for the week. Thank you, Steve, for being here. Very excited to have you on.
Hello. Thanks so much for having me.
Now, Steve, obviously, we here, of course, know your work and really love your stuff, and we're really excited to have you on the show. For those who may be listening or watching who don't know your work, do you want to give us a little bit of a background on what you do in the industry and sort of perhaps maybe the viral video that recently went around of you where people may have caught your name?
Yeah, so I'm Steve Saylor. I'm commonly known as the Blind Gamer, and I'm an accessibility advocate and consultant. I've worked with several studios, including Ubisoft and most recently Naughty Dog, as a consultant brought in for The Last of Us Part 2, which I'm certain we're going to talk about a lot today. And I am also the media editor for caniplaythat.com, which is a site dedicated to reviewing video games from an accessibility standpoint. And yes, I guess also now I'm known as the guy that cried over the accessibility settings for The Last of Us because of that reaction video. So that's mainly that's a thing that happened in the past 2 weeks that it's still very surreal.
I honestly, Steve, I loved that reaction because I've sort of been around the accessibility discussions for a while and have sort of kept track of how accessibility has changed over the years. And from what I can tell and from what I've been told, The Last of Us Part 2 is sort of leap years ahead and just sort of a remarkable jump for accessibility across all facets. And seeing the fight that has taken place to get to this point, I completely understand why it would have been incredibly emotional.
Yeah, it was something that we within the accessibility community have been working on for a long time. And I'm still relatively new within the industry, but it's something that a lot of studios have been trying to figure out and trying to work out. And there's many different studios have tried many different things, and some have succeeded and some have missed the mark a little bit. But we always like to say that start somewhere and you can build up from there. And with The Last of Us Part 2, with its 60 plus accessibility options, it essentially, yeah, as you said, jump leap years beyond what every game has done before. And essentially we're going to be kind of looking back within this moment in gaming history as accessibility before The Last of Us Part 2 and accessibility after Last of Us Part 2, because they really set a new standard that now all of the studios are going to have to try to keep up.
Yeah, it's really fascinating to see the conversation around those options, and it does feel exactly like that. As you were saying, like we're going to look at this moment with this game and sort of be like, that is a measuring post for us to look at future games, especially as we get into a new generation. Obviously, like such a big spotlight is on the industry at large. As we go into a new generation. So as we get to a new wave of games, for them to be able to incorporate these things is really going to be important and really continue to matter based off what we see here. I did want to ask, because obviously I want to talk about your thoughts on the game at large and get into a little bit of all of our thoughts now that we've had a few weeks away from when we played the game and when the game launched. But in terms of that suite of accessibility features, beyond the sort of number of options in there, what in particular stood out to you as something that was really meaningful or impactful for the play experience?
There's a few sort of like specific options that I really enjoyed the most. The one that my reaction video, essentially, what I was looking at when that happened, there's when you turn on the game and you kind of go through a few sort of the options at the beginning, you can come across basically a section where you have three different presets. There's one for vision impairment, there's one for deaf and hard hearing, and one for motor accessibility. And essentially, if you turn on these presets, it turns on a list of so many different accessibility options that will allow anyone within those spectrum of disability to be able to play. And that in of itself, it has never been seen before in games, just because of there usually isn't a lot of accessibility options that would warrant that. But because there was so many, and they offered that as a thing, it's like, we get it. There's a lot here. Instead of you having to manually turn all these on, just turn this one setting on, and it'll turn on everything. And that got me really emotional seeing that for the first time. And I when I saw it in that reaction video, essentially, that like I cried for like a good solid 10 minutes, just kind of seeing just that and hearing actually also the text to speech, which is in throughout the entire game. Every piece of text is readable via the text to speech, including, which was surprised me enough, was the title card that comes up. It even reads that out as well, which was so cool. And it was hearing that list of options. Essentially, that's what kind of got me really emotional. But when I finally jumped into the game and was able to play, the ones that really stood out, that really helped me a lot, was high contrast mode, which essentially turns your character and any of your friends into a shade of blue. It turns enemies into a shade of red, and items you pick up as a shade of yellow, and the rest is everything is mainly grayscale. And that helps being able to determine and be able to pick out enemies and items from kind of dark areas where it'd be really hard to be able to see at first glance. And so, and you can be able to turn that on and off using the touchpad very easily. And also, like I said, the text to speech, but incorporating with that was the audio cues. There are so many audio cues for every single button that's in the game, but also there's so much subtlety to it that makes it even more immersive. Where, for example, if you're about to go up to a rope and you want to be able to climb it, you could just see it. You should be able to see it and be able to hit X and it'll climb. But if you have audio cues turned on, there's an audio cue to let you know to push the X button. But then there's also a sound effect that that precedes that and basically lets you, like, it's a sound effect for a rope. So that way, you know, if you cannot see the rope, there is something nearby that you can be able to climb, and it'll be a rope. And it does that for basically anything you interact with, whether it's opening a drawer, opening a safe, getting on your horse. So cool to be able to just hear like a little horse whinny every time you get near your horse, and you can just like, you know, you can build, like, you can just hop on. And for me personally, what really stood out was the ability to be able to use Zoom using the touchpad. Essentially, all you have to do is you double tap the touchpad, and you can actually be able to zoom in, depending on which sort of magnification you set at in the options. You can be able to zoom into the part of the screen, and you can use your finger to scroll across the touchpad to be able to see where things are. And it's helped many times where I'm like, okay, wait, is that an enemy or is that a tree? And all I have to do is double tap, zoom in. Okay, that's a tree. I'm good. Double tap to zoom out, and I'm fine. And you can do that throughout the entire game. The only control that it interferes with is being able to strum the guitar and pick do guitar picking. But you can use the X button to essentially to strum the guitar. So they've even thought of that. There's like layers upon layers upon layers of accessibility that just incorporate into everything, and it was so cool just to be able to see. And like I said before, a full disclosure, I did work on the game. So even though I knew a little bit of the options, seeing that in the final version of the game was just so amazing. And like I said, it just really takes a leap forward.
I'm really curious. Oh, wait. You go ahead, Jenna.
Oh, thanks. I actually have a question, like a follow-up on that. I know on this show we've talked a lot about the touchpad and how it's sort of an underutilized thing, and do we feel like we need it going forward? But of course, our bias, which is something that like I know I have to consciously work against, is looking at those other perspectives. Maybe the touchpad isn't useful for me as a gamer, as a more able-bodied gamer, but maybe there's these other utilizations that I didn't even consider. So I'm curious, Steve, do you feel like the touchpad opens up more opportunities for accessibility than a different modeled controller? What other ways do you feel like it could be utilized for it in a way that maybe some of us might forget because we're not in that position?
Yeah, I actually would say like I was in the same camp. I really didn't understand the kind of the potential the touchpad had. Obviously, a few games tried it, and essentially, a lot of them just kind of use that as the glorified map button. And I totally
Mhm.
get it. At the time, I was like, okay, it's not really needed. But then when I found out what Naughty Dog was doing with that touchpad, and then even seeing the conversations when the Dual Sense was being discussed, I'm like, just you wait. There's more here, and there's more potential here. There is so much versatility in that touchpad. Like I said, you can swipe left to be able to turn high contrast mode on or off. You can use it to zoom. You can even swipe up on the touchpad, and it'll tell you whether your character is standing, crouched, swimming, prone, and it'll even give you a readout of how much health you have left. There's so much in there that can be used for accessibility purposes that doesn't even really take control over any other kind of options other than basically just pushing the button to be able to open up the crafting menu or anything like that. But even then, just it's so subtle that it doesn't even interfere with a lot of that at all. And I am really excited for the potential of that. And I really think that that's if Sony's first party like PlayStation Studios, if they're able to take that and run with it for accessibility, I'm really excited to be able to see what they can be able to do with that, and just what other potential options could be made within that touchpad.
When you went in to have those initial chats with Naughty Dog, how were you approached, and what did those initial chats look like?
So at first it was I think actually Naughty Dog just likes to sort of poach from different sort of tech conferences and gaming conferences, because I've had a few of my friends who were consultants on it and had very similar story where there was a game conference called Game Accessibility Conference, and they do it usually around GDC. I was there as a panelist for basically a bunch of blind gamers. We were there to discuss what we would love to be able to see in video games, and we had a room full of developers who were really interested in accessibility. And little did I know that there were some people from Naughty Dog, and they came up to me after the break, and they were like, "We want to work with you." And I was like, "Yes, please." I would love that, because of course, like it's when you say Naughty Dog, it's like you know exactly what they're working on. So, and that was kind of the initial conversation, and without really kind of going into more specifics about what they kind of were discussing, but even going into it, I knew what like when I saw kind of what they had, I knew already this was going to be a game changer, and they kind of were taking things that we had been discussing within the accessibility community and discussing at conferences and other studios. Like we've been discussing all that for years, and they seem to Naughty Dog had seemed to kind of take all of those into account. The fact that they started development at the very beginning of the process for accessibility. That's what we've been saying for years. And also as well that it was a studio wide initiative in that it from Neil Druckmann all the way down, it was something that the entire studio was on board with in trying to be able to make these accessibility settings work and work really well. And also, they brought in consultants along the way to provide feedback on what they're working on, offer suggestions and options we would love to see. And they kept bringing consultants back to kind of give progress and figured things out. And then also having the capability that you can like they're tracking all that accessibility information as well in the final product, so that they can be able to improve those accessibility settings like further on and build. And this is something that with all those combined essentially kind of created this really amazing push internally that like if we see other studios doing the same thing, I love to be able to get to the point where I'm going to be nitpicking what accessibility settings are in games instead of saying, why don't you just have some, that kind of thing.
One of the things that I've been told over and over again by accessibility consultants is that accessibility should be baked into your game from the very beginning. Because I feel that there was a trend for a while there where accessibility was like, oh no, we've got to like quickly throw something in there at the last minute, and you could really tell. Whereas if you bake it in from the very beginning, it's very organic and it's nowhere near as much of a lift as it is if you have it at the end. And again, these accessibility consultants I've been talking to have said, hey, it's not actually that difficult to add these features. And it's not only beneficial for people who have disabilities, it's also beneficial to everyone. And if you look at The Last of Us Part 2's options, there are so many ways to play that game, and it makes it so much more enjoyable for that reason. I mean, the difficulty, the fact that you can play with difficulty settings that aren't just like, this is hard, this is very hard, this is beginners, you can mix and match to your own play style is just incredible and benefits everyone. And I think that that's the one thing that I sort of heard over and over again about accessibility, is that it's not just for people with disabilities, it's for everyone. And that's a really important thing to consider.
Well, 100%. Microsoft even said it last year, obviously, when they were promoting the adaptive controller, and they say this phrase commonly, when everybody plays, we all win. And even myself, I was like, I understood that and kind of was like, yes, 100%. Like when people with disabilities can be able to play games, then we're kindly felt like we're brought into the same sort of fold as our friends are. But in reality, even seeing the reaction to a lot of the settings that have been coming out and of this game, and seeing people who don't have a disability whatsoever and enjoying the settings that are there, and just makes it that much more enjoyable and more comfortable to play. It really did hit me that it's like, yes, no, like accessibility settings are for everyone, not just people with disabilities.
Yeah, absolutely. I remember when I boot up The Last of Us, obviously we all toy with some of the options, or at least see like what are my options. That's always one go-to thing I have. And when I saw that they had large subtitles, I selected that so quickly. And I was actually playing like almost at point blank range to my computer because I was just at my desk. But I just like having large subtitles. Like I'm a glasses wearer, and it's just difficult to read when everything's just so tiny and minuscule, or if you're sitting really far back. And Lucy, to your point, I remember with the Outer, I think Worlds, it was where they kind of add that in after the fact, which is definitely better than nothing. But I think more and more we hear gamers of all types, all backgrounds, kind of asking for these different types of options so that they can feel most comfortable and like they have an easy time playing. Because I think similar to when there's bugs or performance issues, like these are all things that can impede our ability to experience the game. And I think that's always the goal, is to kind of get over that stuff so that we can really enjoy what the game has to offer. And that goes for, like I said, gamers of all different backgrounds.
Yeah, absolutely. I was totally right there with you, Janet. Like, obviously wearing glasses very much needed for me to play to a smaller extent. But yeah, something as small as large font can be such a game changer for so many people, that to then layer on, as you were saying, Steve, all of these options and all of these choices, it just lets more people play in a way that is more comfortable for them and more accessible for them. And that just makes the audience bigger, and more voices get to talk about this game and enjoy this game and have fun with this game. And that's just a really exciting opportunity that I hope continues into next gen. Before we jump a little bit more into Last of Us stuff, I did want to ask, because you had brought it up, is your hope sort of that the DualSense can further these things as well? Because if it is truly as sensitive as they're saying and is able to simulate all these feelings and ideas and behaviors, theoretically that should allow for people to interact with their games in a way they maybe wouldn't have been able to before.
I'm very kind of hit and miss with the DualSense at the moment.
Gotcha.
Mainly because, yes, I love the idea of sort of the haptic feedback, because it really does help, especially for those who are blind, to be able to kind of understand kind of like what's going on in the game, and it allows you a little bit more to be immersed into the world. I know that for basically playing anything on the Switch, as surprisingly enough, anytime they have that sort of like very granular, specific haptic feedback, it really does help. And even in The Last of Us 2, they had that to a certain degree with what the DualShock has had. But there is some concerns that for people with motor disabilities in regards to the resistance that you can possibly set on the triggers. And there's not really any, as far as we know, anything like a back button or a back pedal that say like the Xbox Elite controller can have, or even with PlayStation's own $30 adapter, which I love and use immensely.
Yeah.
I hate being able to push in that L3R3. It is the worst button I've ever seen. And I just love being able to like just use the pedal for that. So there's certain things that we're concerned about, and like go back to even to the resistance side of things, because that, like, although that's cool, and I agree that that's a very immersive thing to be able to do within a game, but for those who have trouble trying to be able to use a controller, that sort of resistance can be very it can actually hurt people who have either specific nerve damage or can't use their fingers in like 100% capacity. So I hope that with these new options in the dual sense that we'll be able to, that developers will basically be like, okay, these are great, but we should have options to turn it off, or at least a meter to kind of like give the player a customization to like have a different sort of settings for each of those options.
Absolutely. That makes total sense. And I do hope we see that. I do believe there was a story going around that Naughty Dog is looking to sort of share their accessibility findings and their work in this game with other studios. And essentially, I would hope at least the Sony first party family can kind of adapt this into future games and really continue to build on this work.
Mhm.
But I do want to jump into the game at large, because as sort of has become customary on the show over the last few weeks, basically anyone who appears on the show, how did you like The Last of Us Part 2 overall, Steve?
Oh, so when I started playing it,
And
I loved it.
spoiler free, just
Oh yes,
for
100%.
clarity's
Yeah.
sake. Yes, yeah.
When I started playing it, I loved it, and then about a little bit in, I hated it, and then about a little bit in, I loved it again. And a little bit in, I hated it again. I was like, "Wait, why? Why are we doing this? Why? Why?" And then by the end of it, I absolutely fell in love with it. I mean, it's one of those games that like it takes you on an emotional journey that I didn't expect to have, and it kind of transforms storytelling in a way that I hadn't seen before, and I feel honestly kind of like proves how much video games is its own art form. And I know a lot of people compare it to movies or TV shows that we're getting nowadays, but it really, when you kind of get the opportunity to be able to like really feel like you are the character themselves, that and you're feeling the same emotions as they are, that's something that you don't get when you're watching a movie or a TV show, because you have control over that. Like you have control over that character. And to me, that was amazing to see. And of course, being able to play with accessibility and finally be able to play a game on my couch, which I've never been able to do before, without having to sit like a foot and a half from my TV, which basically kind of a bit of my setup. I even right now, I have a 50-inch TV sitting in front of me that's about a foot and a half, 2 feet away, and that's my computer monitor / gaming TV, and that's how I'm able to see and play. Because everything else is on the couch is really difficult. But being able to finally actually play this in my living room, it was really, really amazing, and I could actually focus in on the story and the gameplay. And I was one that I loved the first one. I thought it was great, and it really kind of pushed storytelling in a new way. But this one kind of takes that even further. And yeah, without obviously like I would love to get into spoilers because there's so many things I would love to just discuss. But I absolutely think it is a true masterpiece in all intents of the word.
And Lucy and Janet, I do want to ask, because I know both of you, Janet, you put together a sort of a drunk spoiler cast, for lack
Yes.
of a better term, and that Lucy was also part of. Now that we're a few weeks out as well, how are you both feeling sitting with the game? Where are you sort of standing? Obviously, I know there's been a lot of capital D discourse about it, but for your,
Oh, we're not going to talk about the discourse.
we're not going to talk about the discourse.
No one will remember the discourse in 15
exactly.
years, hopefully.
And then people were like, "Do you remember that? That was wild." Yeah, I love it still. I loved it while I was playing it. I loved it when it was over. Like I didn't really have any bit of a wavering. There definitely were choices made, right? That like there are twists and things that people feel some type of way about. Is all I'll say without getting into spoilers. But for me, maybe it's because have always been really into storytelling. Like I've talked about this before on the show. I used to teach high school English. I have a strong background in just enjoying narratives, and like if you study English literature, like you're used to dark, twisted stuff. And I'm like, this is just fun to watch unravel. So I didn't have any hang-ups about whatever happened because I just liked watching it unfold. I thought narratively and mechanically there were a lot of wonderful choices made. I think they really worked to have the mechanics play into what the narrative shifts that did occur, which I really enjoyed. And I have liked just talking to people about this game after the fact. Like, I know we're not going to get into spoilers on this episode, but it's such a fun game to talk about because it's so story driven. There's so much drama. Whether you were for or against the drama, there's drama. Like, that's undeniable. And that's just fun to talk about. Even if you don't want to get, there's ways to dig deep with this game and look at themes and symbols and talk about unconventional narrative structure and storytelling and if it's effective or not. But even if you don't want to do all that, like, let's just talk about this and like which character did you like, and did you like Mel at all? How'd you feel about so and so? Like, just having even those surface level conversations are so thrilling. And yeah, that's what I've really enjoyed about the game. And as more and more people and fans and other critics finish it, as much as sometimes those conversations maybe aren't pleasant in certain parts of the internet, I've just really enjoyed having people, and this is not an invite for everyone to DM me, but just having people DM or comment on things that I've done and just bursting to talk about this game, like writing paragraph long and really thoughtful stuff too, of like, oh my God, I'm so glad that you talked about such and such because I got to that part. And I think that's something so joyous. And like I said, there are really dark parts of the discourse. There's different forms of bigotry coming out. There's different forms of just people not playing it and discounting it and leaks. And there's like a million things against having productive conversations on this game. But even through all of that, I see so much just fun conversations happening and joy and intrigue. And that's what always makes me excited about covering games. Like, that's the part that I love about being in this industry. And as much as there's a lot of noise trying to drown that out, I've just really enjoyed engaging with that after release.
Yeah, and I'll echo that insofar as this is a game that is polarizing, and I think polarizing games are far more interesting than the ones that everyone really loves or everyone really hates. And it's polarizing in extreme ends as well. It's not sort of like a comfortable 7 polarizing. It's very much like one end and the other. I think one of the things that I love so much about The Last of Us Part 2 is that we're so used to, as gamers, playing characters who are very likable, playing characters who are very, despite their flaws, you sort of love them nonetheless. And I'm not saying that you don't love the characters in The Last of Us Part 2, that you don't love Ellie, but it challenges you. It challenges your love. It challenges your initial sort of perceptions of what this character is and who she is, and in a way that sort of really swept the rug out from under my feet. Like I've never experienced that before in a AAA game. I felt that they sort of did it so well at the end of The Last of Us, when you felt like Joel was maybe not who you thought he was. And they really sort of doubled down on that here in presenting Ellie and others in really complex shades of grey. I'm sort of flipping around with metaphors here, no, but you know what I mean. Like it's a very human story, The Last of Us Part 2, in a way that sort of makes a lot of other games feel really cartoonish. And I understand that people are mad because it's not necessarily easily palatable. But I think it's brave, and I haven't stopped thinking about it. I finished it a couple of weeks ago. I still haven't stopped thinking about it. And the fact that people are still talking about it with such passion and fervor on either side, I think is really indicative of a job well done in terms of a story that's made a massive impact, and a game that has played with oh God, spoilers, that has played around with our perceptions in the way that it did. So I think it's an achievement.
Yeah. Well, like you were saying, most games are predicated on the idea of wish fulfillment and giving you this power fantasy. And I don't think this story is a wish I would ever want to personally fulfill. But it is one that I'm glad I experienced in this capacity, and it was designed in a way to make you experience it. Like, it is I'm very curious to see how The Last of Us TV show does, because I do think you can make a great TV show, but I do think there are specific things both about the first game and specifically this one as well that are tied, like you were saying, Steve, to this medium. Like it is very indicative of what games can do and not just what stories can do. And so I'm curious how that translation happens into a different form. I did want to sort of touch on the sales success of the game because I do think it's worth us bringing up for sure because this game went into its launch with so much controversy around it and some very positive reviews, including my own, and some critical reviews and some very thoughtful reviews, and obviously a lot of discussion going in. And then it sold 4 million copies in its first weekend and was the fastest selling PS4 exclusive of the generation, first party PS4 exclusive. And it's sort of one of those things that I when that happened, I wasn't shocked, but it was a good reminder of like stepping outside of the conversation around a game as big as this. Like this is something that touches beyond us having this.
No, let's not do that. Let's not do that.
You know what? You guys knew what happened when you invited me here. So,
yeah. Lucy, you and I aren't allowed to do it. Janet, Steve, feel free to do it as much as you want.
All right.
Oh, I got my one in. I'm happy.
You gotta if you haven't lived until you've made that awful joke. Like it's just you have to do it.
It's very true. But did that initial sales success, given the discussion around the game into launch, surprise any of you? Was that sort of what you would expect? Big success for this game because, of course, the first one is such a massive hit.
I mean, yeah, I think Twitter in particular is a filthy, dank hole, and it's very easy to get caught up in the drama of Twitter. The conversation of Twitter and Reddit as well. People are very online, but we sort of forget that there is a whole other contingent of people out there who were completely oblivious to the leaks, who were completely oblivious to the conversations that sort of subsequently arose, and just wanted to play the sequel to one of the greatest games of that particular generation, and they're doing so. And I believe also I'm seeing people enjoy it in spite of the leaks as well. So it's very easy to get wrapped up in this little kind of cosmos of stink. But it's not necessarily indicative of the wider sort of what's happening at large.
Yeah, I think that's totally spot on. I've said this before, like on other places on the internet, but I think it's awesome that a game like The Last of Us sells so well because it's a narrative game. It is very action. I'm not going to pretend like it's not an action adventure game because it totally is. You're shooting guns, you're stabbing people, you're opening those drawers. Like I love opening a good drawer, but like it's so much its story, and like the conversation around this game has been about the story. I rarely hear people even talk about the gameplay. I'm cool talking about that too. It was amazing gameplay as well, but the story is really what is driving the conversation. And I love that because for so long, and even to this day, like, and maybe this is just more of an online thing, but narrative games aren't nearly as popular as the other genres. And some people are like, oh, what, it's just a story, like it's barely even a game. Like, and I love that this kind of fuses those, and it shows that you can have an amazing story even in an action game. And I really hope that this sort of shows that people like good stories, and that there is a market for excellent storytelling. Like I said, it is very much still an action game, but that's something that is just exciting to me. But yeah, it's not, to echo Lucy, it's not surprising in the sense that The Last of Us was huge, and this is a sequel to a huge deal. I think what would be more indicative of what the players at large think is if there is like a Last of Us 3 or another thing in this universe. I think if that wouldn't sell as well, that would more so tell me what players thought of this game. But because the first one was so successful, this one's obviously going to sell just as well, if not obviously way better, because it's the follow-up to something that people already love.
Yeah, for me, I definitely wasn't hugely surprised by that. I was surprised at that number, the fact that it beat out, I guess it was Spider-Man was the one previous record holder for that.
Yeah.
So I had actually thought that it wasn't going to be able to compete with that because Spider-Man is globally known, and it's a lot more pardon the term, but accessible for people who are just interested in video games, to be able to like, okay, yeah, I know who Spider-Man is. I'd love to be able to try this game. I thought it was going to beat that, but having something that is a sequel to a game that you could have played over the past 7 years, but it's something that is very deep within the PlayStation ecosystem, and it's a beloved game. I am not as hugely surprised at as how many copies it sold in that first 3 days, and I'm willing to even say that there's a large chunk of it, even from accessibility side, from disabled players. Nothing makes me so humbled and honored and surprised even more when when the reaction video was happening. I was getting messages upon messages of people buying the game because of its accessibility, and even some people buying PS4s so they can play this game because of how accessible this is. Like that to me, the fact that I sold a few PS4s out of that, I'm like, oh man, like that. I knew this was something. I wish I was about to call Neil and be like, hey, give me some royalties. Like just seeing, and I agree with you, Lucy. Like I think seeing the sort of negative aspect of Twitter when it first came out, like I saw my fair share of it the past few weeks, and I was a bit worried at first because it seemed that according to the sort of Twitter sphere, it seemed that everything was mixed. And but when I saw essentially that news that it sold 4 million copies, I was like, okay, there's a bigger majority that is outspeaking the vocal minority, and I'm very happy to be able to see that is now the fastest growing game. I would love to see like the final monthly numbers for June, just to see how much it grows.
Yeah, absolutely. And I also want to note, because I'm sort of envisioning the comments on this video. I also want to note that, like, you're allowed to not like this game. Just because we love it, we're not telling you that you can't love it. I think that one of the problems that we were seeing is that it wasn't a sort of, this is my reasoned criticism of this narrative structure, or this narrative wasn't for me. It was very vitriolic. It was sort of hateful. A lot of like really nasty memes and stuff were going around. A lot of horrible threats floating around the creators. There was a horrible. It's been nasty, and when you sort of see that nastiness, particularly sort of on a single platform like Twitter, it can feel quite overwhelming, right? And it can feel like that is the discourse around this game. Like the discourse is tainted, like this game is tainted because the discourse has been so negative. And that's not to say that that there are people out there who aren't enjoying it and who are disappointed, and that's totally valid. And I'd love to hear some reasoned criticism from players themselves. Like I've definitely read some great critiques, some great criticisms of this game from writers, but I'd also love to hear some sort of reasoned criticism, because I've got a lot of the old Twitter diarrhea, and I'd love something a little bit more rational.
Yeah, we I think we'll definitely be talking about our more spoiler focused thoughts on this game in the future. And if you have some thoughts on the game that you want to write in with, you can write into beyond@ign.com with those. And as we put together a spoiler cast, it is coming. Schedules have just been crazy. I'm sorry. We will definitely incorporate some of those into that show. But to sort of transition from one incredibly dark and harrowing tale to another dark and harrowing tale, I spoke to some of the team behind Bugsnax earlier this week about really diving into that world and everything you can expect, and some things they just don't want to say just yet about the game. But I spoke to Phil and Kevin from Young Horses about that game, so I'm going to toss to that interview and you can hear about Bugsnax. I'm very thankful to be joined today by Phil and Kevin from Young Horses, the team behind the upcoming and delightfully strange and wonderful Bugsnax, which you may have seen and may has been stuck in your head since the PS5 reveal event, as it has been for me. Phil, Kevin, thank you so much for joining me today. Very excited to talk about this game with you both.
Yeah, thanks for having us.
So, of course, the place I want to start, there's so many things I do want to discuss about this game, but I have to start, of course, with the bit that has popped up in my household every 20 minutes for the last week and a half, honestly, and that's the song. I need to know the origins of the song, the decision to write the song, how the music all came together. Just how did this wonderful earworm of a tune sort of begin, and how did it become what it was in the final trailer?
Sure. So Octodad, which is another game we released, also had a kind of theme song to it. Both the first one and Deadliest Catch had their own theme songs to them that we think kind of elevated the game, propelled it into like becoming more of a meme or more of something that like is like dying to be shared with other people, being just like, look at this weird thing and this catchy song. And so when we went to release our second game, or at least announce our second game, Bugsnax, we figured something similar would make sense. And it felt weird. I think it would have felt weird if we hadn't had a theme song, given that our games kind of give off a like Saturday morning cartoon vibe, I feel like. And so it just feels very in place. And so given the music that was written for the actual like in-game stuff by Seth Parker, our composer and sound designer, the feel of that reminded us a lot of Caro Caro Bonito, who is the band that wrote and performed It's Bugsnax. And they have a song called Picture This that we thought like really fit how the game sounds and feels, and would be good to kind of base a theme song off of. And so I had actually emailed them accidentally through like a publishing company that like published some of their singles, thinking that it was maybe their manager or someone that they worked with, because I didn't, we had never directly licensed a song before from somebody that we didn't know. The Octodad song was actually written by Ian McKinney, who's just a friend of ours. And so that was a little bit more simple. But eventually I got in contact with their management and with the band and talked with them. And luckily they knew what Octodad was. So we had like a good in there and didn't have to be like, we promise we're like real game developers and like this is a real thing. And so we gave them a build of the game. We gave them a bunch of like concept materials, access to the script, basically everything we could to kind of get across what the game was. We had a couple of calls with them just to talk about like the thematic elements of the game, how to incorporate that into the song. And a couple weeks later, they came back to us with the demo, and a couple iterations later, they came back to us with the final tune.
And it's such a earworm of a song, and I love how it encapsulates that first trailer, and I think it pairs so well with it. What I love so much about the song is the way it conveys sort of the bright, cheerful, really bubbly tone of the trailer, but then we get to the end of that trailer and we have this darker moment with the rush toward the camera and sort of this darker nighttime shot. And I was wondering if you could talk a little bit about the tone of the overall game, because that little bit at the end really struck and has stayed with me since seeing it for the first time.
As far as the end, I don't entirely know what you're talking about, but the overall tone is very, it's going to be cute and delightful, but also very mysterious.
Mm-hmm.
And I definitely see a lot of speculation online about what will be in the game, and I'd hate to answer that question.
Of course, fair enough.
But
what I suppose that what you've seen in the trailer is an indicator of what the game could be like.
Yeah, and I think like a good analog to cut in is that with Octodad, it was a pretty cute and fun and almost toy-like game on the surface, but there were some themes in it and some stuff in the story that was actually pretty sad.
True.
Or like deeper than that surface level appearance. And I think you can expect a similar level of depth from Bugsnax.
I would say our favorite thing to do is take an absurd premise very, very seriously.
Yeah.
That was definitely one of my favorite things about Octodad, especially playing it at the sort of beginning of the PS4 generation. I would have friends come over and they'd see this wacky, silly seeming game, and then we'd get to some of the deeper stuff and they'd be like, oh, that was not where I thought this would be going. And so I'm excited to see what Bugsnax can do there as well. I guess on that note, what can you tell me sort of about the impetus for the game based on what we do see in that trailer, and sort of what players will actually be experiencing on a start to the story level?
So yeah, it's about like you're this journalist who has received an invitation from Elizabeth, the character you see in the trailer. She's told you like, I've discovered these Bugsnax. Come to this island and report on the story. Interview me. We're gonna show the world Bugsnax. But when you get there, she's gone. She's missing. Nobody knows where she is. And so you're kind of on this quest to find her, find out what happened to her. But on the way, you meet all of her friends, the other people who are living on the island with her, and they want Bugsnax, lots of them. And so, in order to explore the island, in order to solve the mystery, you've got to catch a lot of Bugsnax and feed a lot of Bugsnax to people.
I did want to talk sort of about the inspirations for this game because it is, at least from what we've seen, a unique mix of things, and I've definitely loved seeing some of the teams sort of share their inspirations from other games for Bugsnax. I was curious, at least for the two of you, if you can speak to your personal inspirations for this project and sort of the team at large.
So for me personally, I was very much influenced by a lot of cartoons that I've seen. Adventure Time was a big one. Not a cartoon, but the Muppets for sure. And then in terms of video games, I had played a lot of Pikmin leading up to Bugsnax. Pokemon Snap was a big one. What else? Viva Pinata.
I think we played Ape Escape for a little while.
We did play Ape Escape. Then I remember tweeting that BioShock was in there. Lost is a big influence.
Yeah. I think I sometimes only refer to it in like a joking way, but like we talked a lot about, or at least referred to, like Apocalypse Now and the island of Dr. Moreau a lot, like semi-jokingly, but also not that jokingly.
Well, they're fun to say because even
They're
though
outrageous.
even
They're
though
like
it is a delightfully themed game, like we can still be inspired by a lot of things that are pretty nasty.
Yeah.
Oh, absolutely. I mean, especially when a conceit perhaps of the game is eating these Bugsnax
Right.
in this deserted island. Who knows where those things may end up? I was wondering what you could say as of right now on a gameplay level, sort of the catching aspect, the collecting aspect of getting these Bugsnax for people. How will that system work? Can you talk about it all yet, or is that sort of to be shown off later?
We can say that it's a first-person game, first-person adventure game, and you use different contraptions and bait in order to capture Bugsnax. Because at some point we'll, have a gameplay trailer and stuff like that. But it's a pretty narrative-driven game, and while you're going throughout the island and finding all of these people who followed Lisbert to the island, you're kind of finding out like what exactly they need and want, and what their problems are, and trying to help solve them through Bugsnax.
Well, I'm very excited to hear more about that as we see more of the game. I do want to ask, sort of as we're wrapping up, of course, this coming to PS5. Can you talk at all about how it's taking advantage of the DualSense controller? Because that's something a lot of us haven't gotten our hands on yet, but it seems something that is pretty built around getting your hands on it and feeling the game more. Can you talk about how Bugsnax will take advantage of that a bit?
Yeah, sure. So the haptic feedback of the DualSense controller has been pretty interesting, actually. Like previously on pretty much any console that has like vibration or rumble or whatever, it's like a nice feature and it sometimes can make things more immersive, but I haven't felt anything quite as like intricate and sensitive as the DualSense's rumble, or as the DualSense's haptic feedback, because in our game, being in first person, like running on different terrain, jumping in and out of water, or running into Bugsnax, you can feel the difference between running on grass versus running in water versus running on sand or snow, and things of that nature, which it feels pretty cool. Or like if there's weather in our game, and if there's a thunderstorm and things of that nature, you can feel kind of like where the sound is coming from through the vibration. we're also taking advantage of the controller speaker. So like when you capture a Bugsnax, each Bugsnax has its own unique cry, kind of like Pokemon do. And you hear it through the speaker of the controller when you capture it. We're even using the light on the controller to display like how in danger you are of a Bugsnax escaping from a trap, things like that. And we're also using the adaptive triggers. Different traps have different kind of functionalities, and some of those are best exhibited through kind of like tension in those triggers or rumble in them and stuff like that, to make you feel like you're really using them. So we're trying to kind of run the gamut and use everything possible, which I think has been like a nice opportunity, because with Octodad we had rumble, but it wasn't something that we like spent a ton of time focusing on. So it's been nice this time around to be able to spend the time.
Now, if you're still watching, you may be wondering why all of a sudden we are all wearing different clothes and the lighting may be slightly different. That is because due to unforeseen circumstances on my end, which I wish I had foreseen, we had to cut the first half of the interview short, but thankfully Kevin and Phil were able to jump back on the line to continue talking Bugsnax, which I greatly appreciate both of you taking the time, so thank you.
Yeah, thanks for having us.
Yeah.
So I thought, now that a few days have passed and I realized I had put you both on the spot for the original interview, I thought I could ask if any that you can say Bugsnax puns have come to mind that you really do love to kick things off for part 2. If there's any that you can say.
Yes, absolutely. I've been thinking deeply about this since last time, because I feel like I just did such a bad job. So it was like the ideal Bugsnax being fusions of bug and snack.
Yes.
One of them is the Frider, who's
Ooh.
French fry spider.
Perfect.
And I would also submit that the best ones, also the food looks like the bug already, kind of.
Oh, yeah.
So another really good one is the peel bug, which is
Oh.
an orange and a pill bug.
Wow.
And so when it's rolled up, it looks exactly like an orange.
Nature's just doing your job for you. That's pretty great.
As it often does.
Yeah.
And I had one more, and that was the cockroach,
Ooh.
which is a taco cockroach.
That's really great. I believe that art's up. I think I may have seen for the cockroach. Yeah, that is perfect. I can't wait I hope there's a Bugsnax encyclopedia at some point around launch, because I will definitely be looking at that for sure. I do want to jump back in though, talking, and one of the things I wanted to ask about, because we had Phil, you had started to sort of mention it at the end of the last time we spoke, was sort of the narrative driven aspect of the game, and I was wondering what obviously not wanting to spoil where the story goes or anything that you can't say right now, but sort of what the team wanted to explore with this story set up, with this idea and this concept of coming to this island and sort of experiencing the lives of all the people there, and what the team wanted to explore with that.
Sure, I can talk about it a little bit, but actually Kevin would probably be much better.
I'm very interested what you say, Phil.
Kevin, because Kevin's the writer of the game, main writer. But I feel like a lot of what we explore in the game thematically are themes of community, and how people go looking for solutions to their problems, sometimes in the wrong places, and how kind of realizing that, or maybe not realizing, and falling into that, can affect your life, as well as themes of like environmental conservation and overconsumption in general, not even only relating to food, but all things.
Kevin, how did he do?
Yeah.
That's beautiful, Phil. I have nothing to add.
Awesome.
I was a bit curious because we had sort of talked about the different environments and the weather in the game affecting things. Is it safe to say that the island will have somewhat different ecosystems and different Bugsnax living in different areas? It'll sort of be a like multi-varietal island, or is it something that's all cohesive and very similar across the map? Like, how did the design of the island come about, basically?
there's definitely a variety of like different biomes across the island, and like, the different flavors and types of bug snacks kind of reflect the area they're living inside of. And so there's you can see a good number of them like in the trailer,
Yeah.
like the sort of the snowy mountainous area, the sort of red rock canyony area, the forests, the beaches.
Yeah,
Um,
I was just thinking about it, and actually, Snacktooth Island kind of reminds me of Neverland in like
Ooh.
Hook or something like that. In the
Mm.
fact that like the seasons and looks of the areas kind of blend from one to the other, sort of drastically, but in like a fun way.
Yeah, I'd call it an exaggerated shift between some pretty extreme biomes. But
Well, as an island I've never visited, I'll take the game's word for how it behaves on an ecological level. I did want to ask though. One of I think the funnier parts of the trailer for me, at least, was sort of the variety you see as bug snacks are consumed in the different ways that shifts the bodies in the trailer. Is that something that figuring out what do bug snacks affect different specific body parts, or is it dependent on what other bug snacks have been eaten? Is there sort of a like mix and match scenario? I have a lot of questions about the physiology of eating bug snacks, I guess.
um, yeah, I guess without getting too deep into it, like uh, any given bug snack can affect any given region of the body.
Gotcha.
And so you could become fully one kind if you wanted to,
Hmm.
if you had eaten enough of it, say. Or you can mix and match all kinds of wacky parts, like, but it is there's not like a specific correlation between limb and bug snack, which is a nightmare on our artists.
Accounting for making sure a bug snack can fit to every limb. Yeah, I can
Mhm.
imagine.
Yeah,
And that the bug snacks kind of fit with each other mostly.
Oh, yeah.
and a lot of the
Um,
characters have different like body shapes and sizes, so that also plays into the variations in the transformations.
oh, wow.
Yeah,
Okay.
some characters are very short and some are very tall, and it has to work for all of them.
And sort of on a more pulled out level, I guess, as just someone who's curious, because I, really, really loved Octodad, and obviously this is the studio's been quiet for a bit of time. Um, has bug snacks been something that's been in the works for a long time? Did the studio explore some other ideas? Sort of like when did bug snacks start to really originate and come into the form that we've seen it so far?
Yeah, we've been working on it basically since we released Octa Deadliest Catch, which was in 2014, so past 6 years or so. Um, and we started off doing some kind of prototyping uh, that we tried to kind of follow the same formula in some ways as we used to happen upon Octodad as an idea, and that like everybody on the team got to pitch like as many ideas internally to everyone else on the team as they wanted, kind of no matter what their job or role is uh, traditionally. And then we kind of all decided to like vote on those. And those were just like one page, like, oh, here's what I think it might look like or sound like or play like. And maybe here's some like inspirational art or things I'm pulling from, like a mood board sort of thing. And then from there, went to doing like prototypes of the ones that everyone agreed were the most interesting. And then took prototypes from like three of those ideas, played them, and then figured out which of these seems like the most promising, which of these feels the most like a young horse's game, and kind of like fits what we try to do and be. And then even once we got to bug snacks as like the main thing, there was a lot more prototyping and figuring out like, well, what is this game really? Because it's always been like you find these half bug, half snack creatures, and we've always had like the grumpus kind of Muppet people. But everything else surrounding it has kind of morphed and changed over the last 6 years quite a bit. To where originally the game was basically 3 games worth of mechanics that were all vastly different from one another, ranging from like Animal Crossing social sim to like cooking mama
Oh,
style
wow.
bug preparation, which both of those things have been either completely removed or changed like drastically since then. So just like giving an idea of, I don't know, how drastically a game can change from concept to completion. Uh, yeah, it's been quite a process and journey of just finding out what works, and then also just like what is feasible with our team because we're only 9 people,
Yeah.
and there's only so much you can do even with that much time.
Yeah, it's that journey is so fascinating to me as someone who, often, especially for our audience, we see the game when it's presented in a trailer or the first images, but you don't necessarily always get that context of the road leading up to those first reveals and the eventual release.
Right. Yeah.
Um, that's pretty incredible to hear that some aspects of it have stayed sort of since the earlier iterations, and then some things have been so completely removed or altered. I did want to ask, and Phil or Kevin, I don't know who best would speak to this, but sort of on a design level, because we did talk about the Bugsnax a bit, but the Grumpuses, as you had been mentioning, what was sort of a Muppet inspiration, the primary source of inspiration for them? How did the design of them come about? Because sort of instantly they felt unique but familiar in like a comfortable way as someone who's been a big fan of the Muppets and stuff like that in the past.
Um, so like the Grumpuses, like I think what we knew about them conceptually at the start was that uh, they were fuzzy, they were trash can shaped, and like they had to have really big mouths so that they could eat very large objects. Those I think were the main design constraints. And then when you factor in that any piece of them could change into anything, they had to also be very modular, like in their design. And that's a lot of the hard work was done by Chris, our art director, who went through countless pages of little monster designs trying to get
Yeah.
at what a Grumpus looks like. Um, and I
And then,
think, yeah,
sorry, I feel like on top of that though, like we both had to make. I feel like this comes up a lot in our designs of things. It's like, okay, they need to be extremely modular, but also each of them have to be unique so that people can point out and say, like, that's my favorite Grumpus, or like I identify with this person.
well,
And so that's why we have like the unique like items that maybe like clothing that they wear or their color
well,
schemes,
and
shape, sizes.
especially when you factor in that all of their body could be completely unrecognizable if you feed them enough, that each individual character needs to have a pretty different body shape and accessories so that you can tell, even if they are 100% pickles, that that's the character you're looking at.
Yeah, just from like their silhouette,
um,
basically.
so I guess it was a pretty big design challenge for all of us to get at the way those creatures look.
Yeah, that seems like, first of all, I love the description of just anything being 100% pickles. I think that's a great way to describe anything. But yeah, the modularity and the sort of amount of things you would need to account for, I could imagine would be a large part of this process on both a gameplay and also design level. Like I would imagine that both sides are really influencing each other in that sort of process.
Yeah, for sure.
And so I guess to wrap up, my one of my biggest curiosities is just, especially sort of as a studio that has been working on this project for so long, but so much of the industry has changed in a lot of ways over this entire generation. So much has happened. Was there anything while creating Bugsnax that the team saw over these last few years that really stuck with the team as something that players seemed to be drawn to, or something that you felt like in the creation of it was going along maybe with trends or going against trends? Was there anything that you've seen in this generation that really stuck out and really maybe influenced the design that you can talk about? I understand if there's stuff that maybe we can't say until we see the full game.
I know definitely John's talked about how like kind of Horizon and Breath of the Wild coming out really hit us a lot. Like, and that was mid development, but it's still kind of like, I don't know, showed us a lot of cool ideas.
Yeah, that's John Murphy,
Uh,
another one of our designers. yeah, those influenced, I think, how the world functions to some degree. And like obviously we can't as our team, we can't recreate that level of like fidelity or interaction, but we've taken like small parts of it to kind of improve our own world that we're building.
Yeah, I would say in terms of design approach, not necessarily fidelity. um, Also, Slime Rancher
Yeah.
was a
Oh.
game I kept an eye on to make sure that we weren't making it. But,
Well, and I think like Ooblets was something
oh,
that came
also
out of
Ooblets for
left
sure.
field
Oh,
that we
yeah.
were like, ooh, are we too close to this or not? And just like uh yeah, the length of the development had us constantly worrying of like, is there going to be something that comes out or is announced that is like exactly or like what we're doing or too close to Bugsnax? And so far, I feel like maybe we're in the same like arena of like cute, bright, colorful games, but nothing has been exactly Bugsnax yet. So I feel like we lucked out to some degree. But I mean, it was also kind of like you're saying, or we're asking, is like a conscious choice and like monitoring of the vibes of the game's zeitgeist.
Of
For sure.
course, yeah. And certainly, at least from my side of things, I haven't seen anything that's quite looked like or felt like what I think Bugsnax could be when we get to play it later this year. And I'm very excited to talk to you both more as we learn more and actually get hands-on time and, of course, see the game later this year since it's launching in the holiday 2020 as of right now. But Phil and Kevin, thank you so much for joining me again. To keep talking about Bugsnax. I really appreciate it. I'm sure we'll have plenty more to talk about in the future, but I will throw back to the rest of our episode and people can get back to all the other PlayStation stuff that happened that week. Probably something, I would hope. But thank you both so much for joining me.
Yeah. Thanks for having us.
Thanks for having us again.
And we're back. Thank you, Jonathan, as always, for your enlightening questions that definitely don't annoy the people you speak with. Before we get sort of into the end of the show, I do want to wrap up just very quickly and mention in a quick bit of real news crunch, I do want to mention the free July PlayStation Plus games for this month. It's also the 10th anniversary of PlayStation Plus. I did not realize that until they mentioned that PlayStation Plus has been around for that long. I forget that it's been a part of our lives for so long. But in July, free games, they're including one free extra game. So it'll be Rise of the Tomb Raider, a fantastic Tomb Raider game. You should definitely check that out if you haven't, as well as NBA 2K20 and Erica, which is sort of a FMV narrative game that you play with a companion app on your phone.
Please play Rise of the Tomb Raider. Even if you haven't played the 2016 reboot, the sequel is so much better. It's so good. Play it if you haven't.
It's amazing. I agree with you on that.
Yeah, Rise is definitely my favorite of that trilogy, hands down, and definitely worth the time if you haven't played it, especially as you wait for the crazy rush of fall games coming out later this year. I did also briefly want to mention they announced today as we're recording that Dreams is getting PSVR support on July 22nd. That's been a long time coming. They announced it during their DreamsCom 20 event where they debuted a bunch of new games that are inside of Dreams that the Dreams community is making. If you didn't catch any of that stuff, I'd definitely go check out Media Molecule's Twitter account to go see a bunch of really fun trailers for some cool Dreams community games that have been made. And then also wanted to briefly mention, since I'm a big fan of the game, we'll definitely talk about it in the weeks to come, Crash Bandicoot 4 got into a weird kerfuffle over the weekend where people thought it was going to have microtransactions and DLC. The devs since have said that the game will not have any microtransactions. This came about apparently because the totally tubular cosmetic skins that are in the game have to be redeemed separately. And even though they are free redemptions, that counts to the Microsoft Store, I think, as an in-app purchase. So that seems to be where that came from. Granted, Crash Team Racing eventually did get microtransactions where you could buy Wumpa coins for real life money. Maybe that happens at some point here too, but it seems like the focus on this download thing is not a gameplay specific feature and was a bit of confusion there. As we sort of wrap up into the end of the show, though, I did want to read. We've been getting a lot of emails that unfortunately have been going unanswered on the show because we have had so much Last of Us to discuss. To the Beyond email account, you can write in with beyond@ign.com. with your thoughts and questions, and we'll read them on the show. The first one I did want to reference was one from Nate, who said, I always hear Jonathon joke about people sending in emails to a joke or something that sounds like he's goofing around. Out of curiosity, does anyone actually send in those emails? And could you read some? For example, in the last episode, Khalif made a reference to the movie Pootie Tang, and Jonathon said to write into the show with fans' favorite Pootie Tang movie references as a joke. No one wrote in, Nate. I'm sorry. I didn't get a single Pootie Tang reference in the Beyond inbox. And honestly, I'm very disappointed. Not that I would know if they were references because I never saw the movie, but not a single headline Pootie Tang reference came into the inbox. So
that's a shame. That's a crying shame.
Nate should be the change that he wants to see in the world.
Exactly.
Yeah, he had the opportunity.
Send it in. Now's your time.
I mean, maybe that email did have a reference and I just didn't catch it. So I'll ask Brian when he's back on the show next week to tell me.
You have no authority here to vet these.
Exactly. That's very true. One question I did want to bring up that I wanted all of us to talk about, just as we've gotten more in this week in the news, has been rumors about the Xbox Series S or Lockhart, the cheaper version. Joshua wrote in, no, actually it's Terrence's question. Sorry, I'm getting so many different questions in here. We got actually a few questions, including from Joshua, about having all three main consoles in this generation. With the launch of the new consoles and limited finances to spend, $500+ on a hardware choice is a lot. If you had asked me a month ago, I would have said obviously Xbox Series X, since it seems to be very gamer focused with forward and backward compatibility, smart delivery, and Game Pass. But after Sony's first-party game showcase, I'm much more enticed to buy a PS5 at launch, simply because there's a growing list of exciting games. Do you think Xbox's focus on play anywhere on anything might hurt their sales at launch? And on the other side, do you think PlayStation's lack of the forward compatibility options and the generations of backward compatibility that Microsoft has will hurt current and future third-party launches on PS4? So I basically want to bring this up to say, do you think we're seeing really different approaches, I think, to how Microsoft and Sony are trying to get people to buy into next gen? And Microsoft really has this focus of however you buy into our ecosystem, whereas PlayStation's like, we're starting a new generation, jump into the new gen if you want PS5 games. How do you all feel those different approaches, now that we've gotten a bit more of them, gotten a better sense of them, are playing out? Does Microsoft's case entice you? How do you feel they're both playing? Steve, I'll throw it to you first.
I think it's basically two sort of different approaches with just how both have been marketing each. And I think Microsoft is kind of in a way, they're trying to be a bit more forward in, they want to be able to try to gain some ground that they had lost in this current generation. And I think actually they're kind of making some really good decisions, and something that, as you said, as the Terrence or Josh said, that they are forward thinking in that regard, and for the gamers. So I'm kind of hit or miss. And I think obviously with the pandemic, everything kind of changed, and who knows what kind of marketing we would have had by now of both Xbox and PlayStation. But I'm curious as to see kind of how sort of PlayStation sort of takes each of those features that Microsoft has been pushing and kind of respond to that, because we haven't really seen that a little bit, well, other than just the big PlayStation event they just had announcing the PS5. So I think the thing that they sort of kind of took into consideration was announcing that second, hopefully cheaper console, with it being the all digital edition, which is something that I'm interested in, mainly because, of course, I can't. $500-600 is a lot to spend on a console at the end of the year, especially buying two at the same time, especially in Canada, when it's like where I live, like the price is just a lot more than the States. But I personally am seeing this also from an accessibility side as well. Microsoft has been really pushing a lot for accessibility. And I think actually this kind of ties in even to sort of the overall marketing of it, is that Microsoft was very forward-facing with accessibility with the adaptive controller. Everybody plays, we all win. Phil Spencer has mentioned many times of how important accessibility is within the studios. They even have an internal accessibility guidelines that is public, that you can be able to see and look at, but it's mandated within each of the first-party studios. And so, I have more confidence in Xbox in their accessibility side, where we haven't really seen a lot of it from Sony's side, other than Last of Us. And I hope that continues further and be able to show Sony, it's like, hey, this is just as important. And obviously, we don't know what's been happening behind the scenes. So I'm just more interested in okay, like I want all the cards on the table. I want to see what each is going to have and what each is going to kind of counter with in the features, and that's when I kind of will make that sort of final purchasing decision, which is what I think a lot of people are probably going to wait as well. So yeah, I'm back and forth with it. I mean, I'm at some point I'm going to buy both. I love both. I want to play both, but it's just determining on what will be my day one purchase is kind of where I'm trying to decide.
Yeah, and it's a very interesting position to be so close to these console launches and yet still so far out from knowing the full scope of what we're going to be getting and what we're buying into. Of course, that's something we'll be tracking in the weeks and months to come on this show. But unfortunately, we are out of time for this week. Steve, thank you so much for joining us. Where can people find you when they're not just rewatching and watching this episode of Beyond or listening to it over and over again?
You can find me on Twitter at Steve Saylor, or on my YouTube channel, youtube.com/snowball. Yes, I did get that URL. I signed
Very
in
nice.
2005. And you can also find a lot of my accessibility work over at caniplaythat.com. I'm the meat editor there, and we have a ton of stuff planned for up and coming. So stay tuned to that.
Awesome. And Janet, where can people find that wonderful, fantastic conversation about The Last of Us Part 2?
Oh, yeah. It's on youtube.com/GameOnysus. That's game ONYSUS. It's also my handle across literally all social media platforms.
And Lucy, we could just find you here, right?
Yeah, I'm just hanging around. This is where I live. You turn the camera off and I just sit here until the next episode.
That seems about right.
You just power down.
Well, I like that you say
what you don't know, everyone, is that we're technically all in Lucy's house right now. It's just that,
it's true. It's really weird.
Especially for SF apartments. But anyway, you can also find Lucy on Twitter at Lucy O'Brien and myself at JM Dornbush. Thank you all for joining me for this episode. And thank you to Red, our producer, as well. I hope we didn't spoil anything for you this go around. Anyway, thank you to everyone who has watched or listened to this episode or to the show in general. We really appreciate it. We hope you're safe. We hope you're well. And as always, beyond.
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 Beyond.